funeral honors does a veteran get? Hey, I am Chuck the Bureaucrat, and this video is aimed at my kids. You know, the people who are going to have to deal with all the bureaucracy once I'm dead and gone. The people who, I don't know, might not be in the mood for a bunch of government BS at that point in their lives. So, in this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to describe the minimum size and composition of a military honors detail, the minimum ceremonial elements, and how to request them. But I'm going to repeatedly make the point that there are going to be some ceremonial elements that are present in some funerals, but they may not be present in all funerals. Like an extreme example would be a flyover. And I make this point because depending on where a veteran is buried, the circumstances of their service, and the resources available at the time of their death, those ceremonial elements may change. And I say this because I've worked with a number of grieving families who have agonized over the question of, is my veteran getting the full military honors that they deserve? As you're going to see in a moment, there are some minimal standards that everybody should expect. And then there are some additional items that may or may not be provided. To get started, U.S. Code Section 1491 lays the legal groundwork for funeral honors for veterans. It sets the minimum composition of a funeral honors detail as 2 people, although it allows for more. And at least 2 of those people must be members of the armed forces, and retirees don't count. In many cases, these 2 members of the armed forces will be from the National Guard or the Army Reserve. Now, in those cases where the funeral honor detail consists of more than 2 people, it can include active duty service members, reserve component members, it can include retirees or members of veteran service organizations. The point being is that the size and composition of that military funeral honors detail can vary from funeral to funeral depending on the availability of personnel. The next topic to discuss is what the ceremony is going to consist of. And by law, the funeral honors detail is going to do 3 things. They are going to fold a U.S. flag, present the flag to the veteran's family, and play taps. Now, something to be aware of is not all military funerals are going to have a bugler. So when it comes to playing taps, the detail is authorized to use a recorded version of the song. There's nothing wrong with the recorded version, but I will say that of all the things that the military does that makes civilians go, "What the fuck was that?" the recorded version of taps ranks pretty high. Personally, if there is one detail of a military funeral that I would pay special attention to, it is that the playing of taps doesn't come off as crass or cheesy. But I also want you to notice something about this minimum standard for a military funeral. It doesn't require a rifle salute. There's no requirement for a color guard. There's no horses or caisson or cannons or flyover. And yet, DoD Instruction 1300.15 encourages the military services to provide additional elements of honor, such as pallbearers, whenever possible. This brings us back to that point I keep trying to make. 2 different funeral services may both meet the standard of full military honors, and yet consist of different additional elements. And I'm sure you're thinking, yeah, fascinating. How do I get this support? Well, DoD has a website called Military OneSource, and this website provides a military funeral honors directory. I'll put the link in the description. This directory lets you enter a state's name to get contact information, and since I grew up in Pennsylvania, let's take a look at their info. What you get is a list of phone numbers to call and arrange for support, and these phone numbers are organized by service and by county. Here you can see that the Army splits Pennsylvania into 2 regions with 2 different phone numbers. But be aware that different services divide the states differently. The Air Force breaks Pennsylvania into 4 regions, while the Navy and Marine Corps, they use a single phone number for the whole state. DoD policy is that the next of kin should only have to make 1 phone call to coordinate this support. And, in fact, your funeral director may be able to help you with this, but you will have to prove that the deceased is entitled to these honors. To do that, you're going to need a DD-214. It's called a Certificate of Release or Discharge from Active Duty. Most service members keep a copy of their DD-214 near and dear to their heart. But if you need help getting one, that Military Funeral Honors Directory includes a link to guide next of kin in the process to request a DD-214. Now, before we wrap up, there are 2 final considerations to consider. First, there are some special people who get special honors. Primarily, these consist of service members who were killed while on active duty, general officers, recipients of the Medal of Honor, and former prisoners of war. If your veteran falls into any of these categories, be sure to mention that fact when you are requesting support. Second, veterans who have committed capital crimes are denied most burial honors. I've never had any personal experience with this, but I can imagine that this might be a painful point for a grieving family. My recommendation is that if you run into this situation, reach out to your local veterans service organization for advice. And now, if you are a veteran who does not have a copy of your DD-214 prominently displayed where your kids can find it, watch this video to see how to get copies of your records.